All right, welcome ladies and gents. Welcome to today's lab where we are going to be going over the muffin method of mixing to make buttermilk waffles. And on the side, we're also going to be making our own syrup rather than using that, store-bought pancake syrup stuff. But first things first, on your mise en place sheet, make sure that you are filling this out as we go. For the ingredients, now there's going to be two parts to this recipe. There's going to be an ingredient list for the waffles themselves, and then an ingredient list for the syrup itself. So, for the waffles, you're going to go with 1 egg, 170 grams of buttermilk, 20 grams of butter that's been melted. Now, when you are melting butter, I would recommend either using a pan or using a non-metal container and using the microwave to melt it. If you use the microwave, just make sure to set it on a low power. Only do it 5 to 10 seconds at a time, otherwise you may have explosions. This is a lot easier and a lot cleaner in my opinion. So 20 grams of melted unsalted butter, 15 grams of vegetable oil, 60 grams of all-purpose flour. Now we're going with all-purpose flour here because we want still a tender end product, but waffles need to have a little bit of structure, a little bit of strength to them, so we're going with a flour that's right in the middle. So we are using all-purpose flour. 2 teaspoons of cornmeal. So 2 teaspoons of cornmeal. Half of a teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 or 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. In here I also have 1/4 teaspoon or 1/4 of a teaspoon of kosher salt. And then I have in 2 different measuring cups, or in 2 different cups I'm using for organization, I have 1 teaspoon of white sugar, and this will be for the meringue, then the egg foam meringue that we're going to make later. And then I have 1 teaspoon of sugar for the waffle itself. I then also have 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then optionally you can add other flavors and other spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, whatever you would like. If you're going to do that, I would add just 1/8 of a teaspoon or a pinch of spices for that. Now, that is for the waffles. For the syrup that we are going to be making, we're going to be making a sugar syrup. So, to that, you're going to have, in a separate part of your mise en place sheet, write out the ingredients for the syrup. You're going to have 3.5 ounces of brown sugar. Make sure that when you are using your kitchen scale that you're measuring for grams and ounces in the appropriate cases here. 4 ounces of water, 1 tablespoon, or just a tiny bit of corn syrup, of light corn syrup. Now, we're actually not gonna measure that exactly. I'm just gonna add a little bit. Just so long as you have about a spoonful of corn syrup, that's all we need it for. We'll explain why later. 1 ounce of unsalted butter. Now that will be cold. And then a pinch of kosher salt. Okay, so for the syrup, we have 3.5 ounces of brown sugar, 4 ounces of water, a tiny bit of corn syrup, about a tablespoon, 1 ounce of butter, and a pinch of salt. Now, a couple quick things. Whenever we are using volume measurements, so tablespoons, teaspoons, the main reason why we use that is for ingredient amounts that are so small that they're not going to actually show up on a scale. So for instance, the 2 teaspoons of cornmeal, the 1/4 teaspoon of our leavening agents, in our syrup, the 1 tablespoon of corn syrup. Things like that, the ingredient amounts are so small that it's not worth putting on a scale. So that's where we would use volume measurements. Other than that, weight is the best way to go. Okay, so to start, for step number 1, now we're going to get started here, is you're going to preheat your waffle iron. So I'm going to pause here and kind of turn the camera here. Okay, so here in your waffle iron, after you have it plugged in and everything, you want to set your dial to anywhere between 3 and 4. The higher the temperature that you have, the more crispy the outside texture of the waffle will be compared to the inside, and the lower, the more even this will cook. So kind of up to you. Any higher than this, it really overcooks the outside before the inside of the waffle is set. So I'm going to leave it right in the middle. You're just going to set that for on. So step 1, you're going to preheat your waffle iron, and then in your oven, you're actually going to optionally here set it for 200 degrees. The reason why you want to set it for 200 degrees is that it's a very low temperature that as you cook your waffles, you can just throw them into this oven just to keep nice and warm until you're ready to serve. If you don't care about that, if you don't care if the waffles get to room temperature, then you don't need to do this, but this is something that will help keep the waffles warm while not overcooking them. All right, now while that is preheating, we're going to go to step 2. Now, the muffin method is you have wet ingredients in one bowl, dry ingredients in another. Now, we're going to slightly modify this. We'll talk about that here in a second. But in one bowl, you're going to add in your wet ingredients. So that is going to be my vanilla. That is going to be the oil, the melted butter, my buttermilk, and I'm going to talk about what buttermilk is exactly in a second. The egg yolk is next. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to separate this egg between the yolk and the white, and the white we're actually going to whip up into a meringue so that our waffles are a little extra airy here. So, now the best way to separate an egg, if you've ever done this before, you've seen a couple different ways where some people crack the egg and then they try to do this thing where they toss the yolk back and forth between the broken shell. And to me, that's just way too inconvenient. So to be fair, the best way to separate an egg is just use your hands. You can have gloves on if you're a little squeamish about this, but I'm just going to simply crack my egg. I'll show how easy this is. Just crack it right into your hand. And then just let the white just slip right through your fingers, and there you go. Nice and easy. So now, yolk just goes right into the wet ingredients. Now, I'll obviously change my gloves here, so give me a second. Okay, I'm gonna take this egg white, just put it to the side for now. And as a part of my wet ingredients, I'm going to add in the 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now it seems kind of weird, like this is a dry ingredient, sugar is a dry ingredient, why would it go in this? Well, because when sugar is added to other liquid ingredients, it dissolves and it becomes a liquid ingredient. So in baking, usually in the muffin method of mixing, the sugar is considered a wet ingredient. So step 2 is I'm going to mix together all the wet ingredients into a bowl and just simply combine that together. So that's our buttermilk, egg yolk, oil, sugar, and vanilla. And now I'm just going to simply set that to the side. So what exactly is buttermilk? So far we've used it in 2 labs. What is it? Well, essentially it is milk that has been spiked with bacteria. And it cultures and essentially it spoils. So buttermilk kind of is spoiled milk, but with good bacteria. And what's really great about this is that it has a great flavor to it, and it has a nice, pleasant tang to it, kind of like sour cream does. Now, because it's an acidic ingredient, you want to use more of baking soda as your leavening agent in baked goods that use buttermilk. One thing that's also cool is the expiration date, as you see on there. If you are working in a home kitchen with buttermilk, technically, since the milk is already spoiled, you can go well past this expiration date. In fact, I have some buttermilk in my fridge right now that's a month a month and a half past this, and it's perfectly fine. Now, if you're working in a kitchen, in a commercial kitchen or a bakery, of course you can't do that. But in a home kitchen, you absolutely can. In fact, when you start to run low on buttermilk, all you have to do is just fill it back up with just regular milk, let it sit on the counter for half a day or a day at room temperature, and the bacteria will reculture the milk, and you have fresh new buttermilk. So it's a really cool ingredient. I wouldn't recommend drinking it on its own, but it's an awesome thing to use in baking. So now I'm gonna go to step 3. This is the next part of the muffin method. We got wet ingredients in one bowl, dry ingredients go into the other. So to there, I'm gonna add in my flour, gonna add in the baking soda and the baking powder. And if you're using any spices, this is where you would add them now. For here, I'm actually just gonna stick with a vanilla waffle here, not gonna do anything else. Okay, so I'm gonna mix, just simply mix that together. And now I'm gonna set that to the side. So in normal muffin method, this would be mixed with this, and then you would cook it or bake it. What we're gonna do is a slight variation on that, where we are going to use the leavening power of an egg white. So I'm going to get a whisk and I'll be right back. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to make a meringue. So your egg white is in a clean, and that is super important because any sort of fat will keep this egg white from whipping up properly. So in a bowl, this is our next step. So step 4 is I'm going to whisk and whip the egg white and the 1 teaspoon of sugar. And I'm going to whip this until it is what is called stiff peaks. Now, stiff peaks, what it'll be is that this will turn from a runny liquid to basically a stiff foam that you can actually hold upside down. So I'm gonna just keep whisking, and when we cut back, it'll be at stiff peaks. When you're whisking, try to go more of, rather than just a stirring motion, try to go a little more side to side. That allows the whisk to incorporate air into the egg. But you can already see it's already getting white and foamy here, so we'll just keep going. All right, and that is our egg white. So you can see if I can get the camera to zoom or focus here. You can see the egg white wants to kind of stand up here when it is whipped. And also, if you want to determine if you whip this enough, it's not going to fall out. So this has a bunch of air in it now, and this will help leaven our waffle and make it nice and light. All right, so we got our wet ingredients, we got our dry ingredients, and we got our egg whites. So here is what we're going to do for our next step. So this is step number 5. I'm going to fold in the wet ingredients into the dry. I'm going to switch over to a spatula, and remember, you don't want to overmix this. So I'm only going to fold it just until I don't see any more dry flour. If there's a few lumps in there, that's fine. So to mix this, just going to fold and just kind of fold that in. Maybe do a quick stir, but scraping the sides and just folding that together. And once I don't see any more clumps of just dry, raw flour, that's it. I'm gonna stop. Yes, there are lumps in here. That's fine. They're gonna cook out. But now also, I'm going to add in my egg whites. Now, this has a bunch of air in it. We're trying to get that air in here and keep it intact. So it's super important how you incorporate this in. So I'm gonna add in my egg whites, and I'm going to very gently fold this in. So what that looks like is I'm going to take my spatula, kind of cut the egg whites in half, and then just kind of fold the batter on itself. Fold, cut, fold, cut, fold, and I'm just turning the bowl a little bit each time to make sure I get every bit of egg white. Occasionally I'll just scrape along the sides, but mainly fold, cut, fold, cut, fold, cut, fold, until I don't see any more pockets of egg whites. All right, and that is my waffle batter ready to go. So I'm going to now have my waffle iron preheated, and then we'll go to our next step. All right, so now we got our waffle iron preheated. I'm going to open the lid, give it a very light spray of oil. And then my next step is I'm going to cook the waffle batter. I'm going to take about half a cup of batter, okay, maybe a little bit more, maybe 3/4 of a cup of batter, and scoop that into the iron, and then I'm going to close the lid. Now, if you want to get your second iron or second waffle going, you can just simply turn this over and open the lid. Now, obviously, if you're doing this at home, your waffle iron may be a little bit different, but I should get 2, maybe 3 waffles out of this. It's looking like more like I'm gonna get closer to 2. That's okay. I don't want to fill this up so much that the batter, when it expands, is flowing down the sides, then I have to clean that up. So that looks good. So it makes about 2 waffles here. I'm going to close the lid, turn that again, and in a couple minutes I'm going to check on the waffles and set that to the side. All right, now while the waffles are cooking, I'm going to make the syrup here. Now, in your groups, this is where your group coordination kind of comes into play. While some people in your group are taking care of the waffles and getting them measured out, getting things preheated, another few people can get the syrup going and have that on the side. So these are completely separate steps. So however you want to do that on your mise en place sheet, if you just want to continue adding on to the steps that you already have for the waffles, you can do that. Or if you want to mark it as completely separate steps then from the original waffle recipe, you can do that. So what I'm going to do is, in a pot, in a small saucepan, I have my brown sugar. I'm also going to add in the water into the saucepan, and I'm going to add in just a touch, about a tablespoon of light corn syrup. Now, the reason why we're adding corn syrup here is, if you don't, we'll learn this more as we get into sugar syrups and sauces, is that if you don't, the sugar syrup will actually harden and you won't have a nice smooth pancake syrup. Instead, you'll have something that's kind of gritty and crunchy, not what you're shooting for. So I'm just going to simply swirl that together, or stir that together, and I'm going to turn the heat on to about medium-high. Okay, I'm going to turn the burner on to medium-high. Now, it's important to note, we are making a sugar syrup. While sugar syrups make some great things, from candies to what we're doing here, they can become very, very hot, over 300 degrees. What makes them worse is that they are very sticky. So if they get onto your skin, even if they have gloves on, that sugar syrup not only sticks to your skin, but it will continue to burn through your skin. So if you're not careful, or you swirl the pan too much, or you're messing around with it and it gets on you, there's a good chance that you will need a skin graft for this. So it's not to scare you, but it's just to make sure that you are being careful here. Whenever you are moving the pan, you want to do very, very gentle swirls or very light stirs. Okay. So from here, I'm going to just let this come up to the boil, or let it come up to a simmer, and I'm going to let it go for about 5 minutes. Once I've done that, I will then go to my next step. All right, at this point, you see the bubbles are starting to stack on top of each other. I'm going to simply turn off my heat. I'm going to add in the kosher salt. And then I'm going to emulsify in my butter. So I'm going to add that in, and very gently, I'm just going to stir that in. Okay. Again, don't stir too quickly here, but it's super important that as the butter melts, that you swirl it in. We're making an emulsion here, so we want to make sure that we're combining the fat and the water that's in this syrup, and so that the syrup will thicken. And once the butter has melted, I'm just going to simply put this to the side until my waffles are ready to go. So if you time this right, this should be ready to go by the time the waffles are done. Now you do want to let this cool just for a little bit here, just because right now this is screaming hot and you definitely don't want to eat this as is. But right now, as is, this is a syrup that is much, much, much better than anything you'll buy in the bottle. So that's our syrup, ready to go. All right, now that the syrup is done, we are gonna go ahead and plate this. Unfortunately, the camera cut out while I was taking this out of the iron with tongs, but I let these rest. I then sliced them on a plastic cutting board with a knife to cut them into quarters to make this look a little bit better when plating. So I'm gonna put my plate here in the center, and what I'm gonna do, rather than just putting it just on the plate as is I'm going to kind of shingle this just a little bit, stacking the pieces on top of each other to add a little bit of height. And now I'll be able to plate this with some fresh fruit. So kind of put some berries and raspberries just over the top of this, as well as some blueberries here. Make that look nice. Give it a dusting of powdered sugar. A little bit more there. And now I've got my syrup. Now I can just pour this right over the top, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the syrup served on the side and just plate this right alongside. And just like that, we have our nice, beautiful buttermilk waffles. Now, occasionally during a certain labs, you will have the opportunity to plate this and plate your desserts or plate your creations and make them look visually interesting. So during this lab, I want you to do the same. Plate this up, try your own designs, swirl this syrup on the pancakes, make designs on the plates. Use all the different plates that we have here, from round plates to rectangular plates. Do what you got to do to make this look good without stealing my design here. So from here, I can just simply take this and just like a customer would, just pour that right over the top. And that is our waffles lab. If you have any questions for me, of course, let me know. Hopefully this was a good demonstration of the muffin method of mixing, and I'll see you guys in the next lab.